Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brian Carpenter, and I'm the curator of Indigenous materials here at the American Philosophical Society's Library and Museum. We're very glad to have you here today, and would like to welcome you to today's virtual book launch for Volume 2 of the Boas Papers project on Franz Boas, James Teit, and early 20th century ethnography, featuring a conversation with volume editors Andrea Laforêt, Angie Bain, John Hagen, Sarah Moritz, and Andy Diane Palmer. We're really glad that so many of you have joined us today, I know from all over the continent, so welcome. To begin, we would like to acknowledge that the American Philosophical Society resides in Lenapehoking, the past, present, and ongoing homeland of the Lenape people. We also wish to acknowledge their continued presence and perseverance despite centuries of land theft, forced removal, and persecution of their language and cultural traditions. Society also recognizes that it has benefited from being an occupant of this part of Lenape land, now called Philadelphia. Because of that, through its Center for Native American and Indigenous Research, the Society seeks to promote research that honors Indigenous knowledge, cultivates scholarship, and strengthens languages and cultural traditions. We express our sincere thanks for the past and ongoing generosity of numerous Indigenous communities and individuals who have offered guidance, expertise, and opportunities for collaboration that have made this work possible. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the American Philosophical Society was founded by Benjamin Franklin in 1743. The Society, located here in Philadelphia, is a catalyst for the discovery of new knowledge. Election to membership to the Society honors those who have made exceptionally significant contributions to science, the arts and humanities, and to public life. The Society promotes research by providing over $1.5 million in research grants a year, especially to younger scholars in need of the support the most. Our library and museum collections and research centers serve scholars and visitors from across the globe. Please check out our website, amphilsoc.org, which a colleague will put into the chat, to learn more about what we do and news of upcoming events. Today's program is sponsored by the Center for Native American and Indigenous Research here, or CNARE, as we're called. CNARE works with Indigenous communities throughout the Americas and with campus and community-based scholars to assist people in finding and utilizing the collections at the APS Library and Museum. And you can learn more about CNARE on our website. We will share the link in the chat. And also during the course of the chat, I will since we were talking about the specific archival materials we're talking about here, I will share some links in the chat to ways that you can access and look at the James Teit materials that are under discussion here today. In partnership with the University of Western Ontario, the University of Nebraska Press, and the American Philosophical Society, the Franz Boas Papers project is dedicated to enhancing access to the digitized Franz Boas papers through transcription and annotation of his professional papers and correspondence. And this project's documentary editions, which we're hearing about one of them today, provides researchers with unparalleled access to unpublished material with significance for histories of the human and natural sciences, as well as Indigenous knowledge, languages, and cultural persistence. Volume 2 of the project, which we're hearing about today, explores the development of the ethnography of Salish-speaking societies on the North American plateau, as revealed through the correspondence between Franz Boas and James Teit. The letters between Teit and Boas chronicle Teit's varied career as an ethnographer from shortly after meeting Boas in 1894 through Teit's death in 1922. And we'll learn lots more about that in the talk ahead. We're also pleased to offer a discount code. You can save 40% through the University of Nebraska Press, and a colleague will put the discount code into the chat. So that's a great discount. Please take advantage of that. A few housekeeping points. We're using a Zoom webinar for today's discussion, so everyone's been muted just as an automatic thing. If you do have a question, we will have a Q&A session after the presentation and discussion today. There's a Q&A button at the bottom center of your navigation bar. You can type your question in there at any time. And at the end of the presentation, we'll have questions for the speakers. With that, I'm pleased today to introduce today's speakers. Andrea Laforêt formerly served as Director of Ethnology and Cultural Studies at the Canadian Museum of Civilization and is Adjunct Research Professor in the School for Studies in Art and Culture at Carleton University in Ottawa. Angie Bain is a researcher, analyst, and oral historian with the Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs and the Lower Nicola Indian Band in Merritt, British Columbia, specializing in land claims, litigation, and community histories. John Haugen holds a certificate in research from Simon Fraser University, is an Anthropological knowledge keeper, and is a researcher at Anthropological Nation Tribal Council in British Columbia. Sarah Moritz is an assistant professor of anthropology at Thompson Rivers University in Kamloops, British Columbia. And last but not least, Andy Diane Palmer is an associate professor of anthropology and interim director of the Kuhl Folklore Center at the University of Alberta in Edmonton. Welcome to you all, and I will turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Andrea, do you want to get us started?
I can't, I don't know how to do this. I mean, I was asked to restart my computer, so I did. But
we can hear you fine, Andrea. Go for it.
I think as we give her a couple of minutes to get connected, I just wanted to thank Brian for the introduction and the welcome. We hope to have Regna Darnell join us. Hopefully she'll be able to join us at some point during this. And she could give a broader introduction to the overall project, but Andrea is our lead in the volume, I think everybody would agree. So if you're able to start us off now, please do so.
okay, well, perhaps, it's been a long time. We actually met for the first time at breakfast meetings organized by Regna. Some of us met together. We all met for the first time 8 years ago at UBCIC in Vancouver. And over that time, there have been moments when it seemed that this was rather a difficult thing to do. There have been forest fires, there's a pandemic, there have been atmospheric rivers that wiped out highways that were rather quite important to people living in BC. But for one reason or another, we have managed to stay together and bring this to conclusion. But we are talking about two people who came together, not quite by accident, but certainly serendipitously. Boas wanted to have this idea of inaugurating the series of ethnographies. He was looking for someone who could write about the Intlakatmer. And he managed to find his way to Teit's house and commissioned what was at first a rather limited paper and grew into a whole series of ethnographies and began in 1894 and only really momentarily concluded with Teit's death in 1922, because Boas continued to work with his students and with others to bring Teit's unfinished work to publication. And that took an additional 10 years. When all of that started, Boas was 36. When it finished, he was 72. It's a long time in anyone's life. And there is a great constancy there that I think is hard to notice because you don't notice the passage of years. Well, of course, the books came out. Well, there was no real, of course, about it. He really worked to make that possible. And of course, Teit's work came to a conclusion. But there was no, of course, about that, because he worked in the midst of having a young family, in the midst of doing other things, in the midst of reverses for his wife's family and so forth, to really get the manuscripts done and to bring it to a conclusion. So this is really the moment to celebrate the work of two people who were not always together. They corresponded, and they met now and again. They had very different lives, but they managed through what eventually became 26 years and then 36 years to bring these publications to a conclusion, and to bring together and to make possible for us today, not just the published knowledge, but all of the collections, all of the unpublished notes, all of the photographs that Teit made, that we draw on constantly if we work in this area. And it's a huge achievement and something to celebrate it. So when Teit and Boas got together, they were writing about immediate issues and their immediate experience. They had no idea what the long-term outcome would be. Teit's commission, his first commission, was for a fairly limited paper, which grew and grew and grew, and finally became the first ethnography, the Thompson Indians of British Columbia. From our perspective, from their perspective, we were unheard of. We're a peanut gallery, assembled in the future to think about what they did. They couldn't imagine us. I'm not sure they would have approved of all of us. Certainly might not have approved of all the things we thought. They had no way of looking forward to our situation, because when they began, they had no idea how it would all come out. We do know how it all came out, and that gives us a privileged position to think about what they did and to think and to comment on it. So when we put these letters together, the primary goal was simply to present the letters and to present the situation in which they found themselves, to understand their perspectives, and those perspectives did change. Their experience changed over the years. And basically in presenting the letters, we wanted to present the story of that collaboration, that very long, collaboration between them, between two people, one of whom lived in New York and the other lived in Spence's Bridge, places that were very far away and very different. In doing this, we wanted to amplify the context a little, to provide commentary that did not intrude on the letters, but amplified the context in which the letters were written, and to provide a little bit of retrospective perspective. We also began simply with one archive, the American Philosophical Society. But when I first considered this project, I really didn't see how it was possible to do that, because in doing that, we were beginning in medias res. I had spent a number of years working with the American Museum of Natural History archives and the letters between Boas and Teit there. And I couldn't see how the story could be told without including those letters. So those letters, with the kind cooperation and help of the American Museum of Natural History, became part of the story. And the American Philosophical Society letters, of course, were part of the story, but they became more and more available to us through the work of Brian Carpenter and Paul Sutherland and others there. And then fairly late in the project, we realized that we can't actually tell the story without including what was then the Canadian Museum of Civilization archives, because of the years that Teit spent working as an outside ethnologist for what was then the National Museum. Now, first, the Geological Survey. I have to say that that particular museum, where I worked for a long, long time, changes its name every 25 years. I have this tabulated. And so when Teit began, it was the Geological Survey of Canada. It became, just before I think he died, the National Museum of Canada. It became the National Museum of Man. And then it became the Canadian Museum of Civilization in my own time. And just after I retired, it became the Canadian Museum of History. So each of those names actually refers to the same institution. So we were able to, through the kind offices of what was then the Canadian Museum of History, to add the letters between Teit and Sapir. And in doing so, also added some letters between Sapir and Boas. And throughout, we have also been attentive to and added in letters from Homer Sargent, who was extremely instrumental in financing Teit's work after 1907 and some of Boas's work that benefited from Teit's research. So I think I'm going to stop there and say that's what this book is about. There are, it's based on the letters of 3 archives. The monographs were all published by 1930. But what remains in the American Museum of Natural History, in the Canadian Museum of History, in the American Philosophical Society, in other local museums in British Columbia, the Royal British Columbia Museum, museums in Ashcroft and so forth, are a huge body of knowledge assembled by Teit in the course of his collaboration with Boas that is there to be studied, to be consulted, to be redefined according to the insights and knowledge of the people who are living today. And I'm going to stop there and let others chime in.
It's okay if I add to that a little bit.
By all means.
So I'm in Tlakatma from a community called Merritt, which is in the south central interior of the province of British Columbia. I now live and work in Vancouver with the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. So my connection to Teit for me was both professional and personal. And I seen my friend Christina is listening today, so I just wanted to give a nod to Christina, who first got me involved in this project. I hadn't heard of it, and I hadn't heard of this team that was starting to think about putting together Boas's correspondence. And so she got me invited to a meeting, and after that first session with the team there, meeting Regna, meeting the other editorial team members, it was it. That was it for me. I said, okay, we've got to get a Teit volume. We've got to get these letters out to communities, because as a researcher, I know how hard it is to do that. It's so hard for people to go beyond the surface, but beyond the published memoirs, as Andrea says. So for me, it was really important. And the journey has brought me all over the place. And yes, I've seen bits and pieces of these before. I had seen the Museum of History collection. I had never gotten into New York to see the American Museum of Natural History. But this project brought us all over. We looked at Library and Archives Canada records. So there's Teit correspondence and Record Group 10 materials. There's collections at the BC Archives, the Game Warden files. And thanks to people like Wendy Wickwire, who helped us along the way, pointing out resources. So we got into the Harvard University has a beautiful Teit collection. So my community got in to see that. And then in November, I went to the Shetland Islands for a dream that came about because of this project. And it has the correspondence of the Teit family. So James Teit was from the Shetlands, and he came to Canada as a young man. And he really didn't go back that much, did he?
I think
But
you went back once at least.
yeah, once. But he wrote back and forth with his father. And in that collection is also the story that came after. So Tate's own children, as they were trying to do this journey that our team did, to find the materials themselves, to celebrate and understand the work of James Teit. So that correspondence was just an amazing find, because much of the family remained in Merritt. And so I got to see people I knew about from my home community, trying to make sense of the work that he did. So I just wanted to say, for me, it was a very personal and professional journey. I think I'll leave the professional side of it until we get to Q&A, but I'll pass it on to John, if you want to talk, John.
You're muted, John.
Thanks, Angie and Andrea. Homer Napnukun Kashade can Kishout can and Squashed and Klakam and Joa. So I just introduced myself in Klakam. I do live at the confluence of the Thompson and Fraser in British Columbia, an hour away from where Angie described her home. I feel lucky to be living here because in our local cemetery is the brother of James Teit is buried there along with other notable people. But 21 years ago in the museum that Andrea spoke of where she worked, she told me at that time there could be a Teit lunch because there was so many people working on the periphery of James Teit and his contributions to the real ethnography of various tribes throughout the western part of North America. And I really want to acknowledge Regna Darnell for bringing us all together to collaborate on some of this monumental work. I haven't seen such a huge volume like this produced in a long while, and people will think it's very expensive, but it's been a long haul, like Andrea mentioned, and Andrea really kept us going in much of this and connecting with us every week and prodding us to move things forward. And so that was really helpful. I know I lost some material in the fire she mentioned, and I wish it wasn't like that, but we had to keep going forward, and I'm just hoping to get the hard copy in a day or two. But I want to acknowledge the other people that contributed, and there's just so much to talk about. And I think after people really get a chance to look at the book, they'll have way more to talk about and more discussions and those kind of things. And it's just a relief for Andrea, I think, that this is done, but I know she can do a lot more projects too, and others like Wendy, she could probably do another volume to her book. And what really came out of this work for me was Tate's work with language and being all encompassing, trying to capture the ethnobotany, the plants, the basketry work, and the connections to Homer Sargent and how Homer Sargent was funding a lot of the work behind Teit and making sure photographs of baskets were taken and more research on basketry and the makers and those kind of things really is helpful to our community right now because of the losses, and you have to look back and try to figure out who these baskets were connected to in the communities. And so there's lots of things like that that are happening on the ground. And even with the ethnobotany work, we're still working with some of his work, the words he attributed to plants and the uses and those kind of things. So that's Tate's been gone for 102 years coming up, but his work is really present in today's world. So I just want to acknowledge that, and I'll pass it on to Sarah. Kukshem.
Sham.
Hoxam John, wait, Yediction 1 Kachwa auch. I'm joining from Kamloops today, and the beautiful unceded Shkwapmuch Uluch, and maybe not far from John. I can, if I send you a smoke signal, you might get it. There's one thing I want to say before I talk more about Teit, and that is I just got a message from our Mindener journalist, Jürgen Langenkemper, who has written and dedicated much of his life to Boas. And he says that last Friday, Trudel Michelsen died. She was 94 years old, and she's the youngest daughter of Cynthia. Her youngest daughter, Cynthia Pinsky, informed him. Trudel was Boas's youngest granddaughter, and she was the daughter of Franziska Boas. And he said, he says, and the daughter said, they sent us this message to think about the lineage and the legacy that Boas has left and still leaves for us today. So I begin by acknowledging that Trudel has left us last Friday. Andrea, John, and Angie have spoken so beautifully and accessibly and eloquently, and I don't know that I have anything meaningful to add, but maybe I'll give you a little anecdote of how I joined this project and this particular sub-project, and that was me getting access to the APS as our mothership. Angie mentioned that we, through the course of this project, found many different connections and locations and bringing things together and collating things and finding a picture in another archive that connects to a letter at the APS. But I came with the ambition to read everything that Boas had written in German and in English. And I am so glad that he did not have email, because then this would be a mission impossible. And the non-email approach was also mission impossible, because there are huge and vast amounts of materials, and there isn't possibly a chance to read all of it in a short amount of time. I wanted to do the same with Teit's unpublished professional and personal correspondence and his notes and his photographs and everything there was. And that is also difficult to do over a short period of time. You know, we're talking 8 years now, 10 years. I call that short, but it does feel long too. I came with a sort of historicist, revisionist idea. We are going to look at the messy complicatedness of their methodologies, their relationships, their professional habitus, and to also look at who they were as people, as family people, as friends, as activists, as editors, as fathers, as brothers. And I think we achieved some of that, and that transpires through the pages that we put together. We had envisioned 1 volume or a short kind of crunchy thing, and it's become longer and longer and longer, and quite rightly so. We sat down thinking about how to create a context that doesn't, as Andrea said, amend or change the letters, but that just gives important indicators and connectors and lineages and the behind the scenes. And we have refined our approach as we went along. I remember how at the beginning we sat down thinking, what is a good way to annotate? What's a good way to provide context? And this, what you see now, is the result of long messy, laborious team meetings, conversations, talking about individual terms, back and forth over phone, emails, across fires and births and deaths. So this is what you have now in front of you, if you can access it, hopefully. I think our goal has been to present the content and the tone of the letters. And I think I'll leave it to the audience and the readership and the reception history to judge if we achieved that, but that was our key goal. I think that we have understood that what we've put together here, and this is just a sort of, you know, a tiny puzzle piece of the whole legacy of Teit and Boas and Sapir and Heberlin and Sargent and whoever else is connected, but that this is like a living archive and not a frozen in time image. And this book is part of a longer conversation, but a sort of a way to maybe ignite and reignite a broader dialogue and a dialectical and a sort of, you know, a vibrant discussion that we can have across different backgrounds and spheres and ways of belonging. I spent years trying to properly translate German materials like the letter of Hermann Heberlin for this project on basketry, realizing that he was one of Boas's most favorite graduate students and that this loss left a massive hole that he couldn't fill. And then Teit appeared and he thought, well, you know, I've got Teit after all, and he will fix it. It won't be as, you know, brilliant as Herman would have done, but, you know, maybe we can make this work. It will be like life, you know, it will be sort of a work in progress. And without Sargent, that wouldn't have happened. I think that our volume shows you the way in which Teit wrote, straightforward, without, you know, polish, uncertain, unclear, unsure, you know, with things like, I hope this is advisable to you, Boas, you know, and then, you know, being persistent and persistent and persistent again and again, even if Boas put him off. So read across the pages and find ways for the work to speak to you, and don't read it from cover to cover if it's too complicated. But yeah, make this story speak to you in whatever place you are and whatever story you are weaving right now. And this is what I'd like to pass on to you. And read everything else that you find around it. We've heard Wendy Wigbar's work. All of us have written things. Find as much of that as you need to understand the context. Kukstum. I'll pass it on to Andy.
Thanks, Jen. It's really a privilege to be here with these wonderful co-editors, and it's exciting for us to all be finally realizing this book is out. I haven't seen it yet. I'm still trying to download it, but I'm really pleased to be here to work on those access codes. Anyway, I'm joining you from Treaty 6 territory, and I wanted to acknowledge that even you know, I'm out here in Edmonton in Amiskwacis, Waskahikan, but my heart is really in Salish territories, and I'm so pleased that Teit found a world there that welcomed him, that he could have a home and grow old at Spence's Bridge in the heart of a Salish world. The thing for me that made the most difference about what Teit was writing from was the everyday sound of the train that he had to listen for and then figure out how to get a letter quickly to Boas on the train, or watch the river go by and notice who was visiting, and being in his home to receive people, being around to see the destruction of the land with the excavation for railroads, to hear the sound changes with things echoing through the Fraser Canyon and and the Thompson River. Because now, as John's home and all that land is in part falling into the river, and as we're seeing landslides following fire, Teit, if he were writing today, I think that's what he'd be mentioning. So we have somebody who was embedded in a particular place, writing out to Boas about what was happening at that moment. Those particular letters include some that speak about his work as Secretary of the Allied Indian Tribes of British Columbia in his later years. And anyone who'd like to dive in at an odd place can go towards the letters in 1920s and up to through 1922 to see some of that and that engagement and what mattered to him in his life beyond producing the published books. So one thing I want to mention about that is that I think that there are places here that are the places to open the book for those who are here because they're thinking about how to frame something for people who've never been into the territory, who want solid evidence of something from the past that could point to the way we can move forward in terms of what we're going to do with the situation around the rivers in the interior of BC, and what we're going to do to make sure that fishers can still get what they need to sustain people. So these letters are tools for a lot of people. There's places to go and look. And what we've tried to do in part is to bring a set of letters forward so that you can spend your time not locked in an archive, which is a wonderful experience, but actually you've got something in your hands that you can use to start a conversation, so that you can be the next to look at these letters. So the accessibility of these letters is fairly important. There is a code that'll make it a little less expensive. There are also some things that can be addressed by Brian Carpenter and Matt Bukovoy with regard to more accessible copies of the book for those who are from Indigenous nations, not just Canada and the US, but around the world too. And so do notice what will come up soon in the chat about that, because I understand there's some extra codes. Anyway, thanks to all from Lachute Seed Research who have shown up. I just wanted to have a shout out to my dear colleagues who, when I was a young graduate student, Taksha Blue-Vi Hilbert invited me into a world that included both the Lachute Seed, the Salish language of the Skagit River in particular, and then into this world that involved a bunch of wonderful scholars who thought nothing of applying to the American Philosophical Society for a grant, a few $100s, to be able to travel to places like the BC Provincial Archives. And so for all of you, this world that we are so fortunate to inhabit, this has both of those things and all those people. So I hope for those of you who are new to this book, a big welcome into a beautiful world of respectful, knowledgeable, caring scholars. I lift up my hands to all of you.
If I could just say, I just had a message from Regna, and she's been having difficulty logging on. So I've sent another link, and I hope she'll be able to join it.
Well, thank you to everyone for your introductory thoughts and all you shared so far. I would like to encourage everyone who's joining us, anyone who does have a question that they'd like to include, please feel free to put it in the Q&A. I'm glad to share it with everybody. And I also want to second the greeting to everyone who's joining us from many places. I recognize some names of people who've been in touch. And for anyone who hasn't yet been in touch, we're very glad. The majority of the requests we receive and work that we do at our center here is with Indigenous communities directly. That is our primary audience and constituency, and we're very glad to be in touch. So I will put our email to our center chat, and we'd be very glad to assist anyone with any questions. I've also put some links to some overall guides to much of the tape materials that are here. But along those lines, I would say us and archivists, kind of what we know how to do is like to make big lists of things. Like, here's all the information, here it all is. So these this project, but it doesn't really give much information on where should I start, how do I find ways into it, even with more accurate and annotated information. So I'd like to, I, along with many people, are very grateful for this project and all the countless hours of work people have done. One thing I would be curious to hear others' thoughts on is, in Teit's letters, Teit is kind of a dream kind of person in archival correspondence, because he does actually reflect and give a lot of in-depth information about what he's doing and how he thinks about it. And a lot of the times he's saying, well, I know this because I was talking to this person over here, or to this group of people over here. And so there are lots of entryways into learning about who has actually held all this knowledge and could reflect upon it. Could you share some thoughts on ways you've approached sort of how to bring that forward, the actual Indigenous people that Teit was talking to and who actually directed much of this work?
Andrea, do you want to speak to that first?
Sorry, I was occupied with Regna. Sarah, can you respond?
I found that some of the places and letters and across the years are easy to identify, but what the best approach is to, for each of these mentionings or maybe indications that Teit had learned or collaborated with or had a context with or some kind of relationship with a particular person or more than one person, is really by reconstructing across different locations. I have an example here. See if I can share my screen. A good location is a pragmatic location to, let's see if that works. No, that doesn't work. Let me see. So I'll try again. See if I might not be able to quickly locate it, but it's a receipt, and it is it's a receipt and a bookkeeping, an account where a transaction was recorded between a couple of people and Teit, and that can be linked to a specific location in the letter to create a broader picture on the relationship, what it was like, where it took place, who was involved, who wasn't involved, who was omitted, who might have been involved. So it's really this sort of a particular meticulous reconstruction of that place and that relationship. I found, at least for me, that this is the best approach. So it is I would call it some form of, tinkering across locations. And reconstructing from the bottom up. But I don't know if others have anything else to add in regards to, locating people and relationships and specific names. Angie or John, maybe Andy?
I'll just make a quick note. One thing I should have mentioned when I first talked was I found my relatives in the material that I didn't know that there were photos of, for example. So when Teit took photos for the geological survey, he took photos of two members of my family that I'd never seen. We don't have photos of them. And then I looked deeper into the material, and like you say, Sarah, you really do have to look at all of these pieces, because he only recorded one of my relations as a Thompson woman. And then you look a little deeper, Mrs. George Bent, right, with no first name, no identity of her own. And then if you look even deeper into the unpublished materials, he had a little note, and he said, Mrs. George Bent Tuchwalks, which is her native name, but he spelt it kind of differently. So that was a challenge for me because I don't speak my language, and to be able to piece together the way that Teit heard and wrote some of these names, and see that he was speaking about the same person at different times in all of these materials. But really, like Andy says, it's all about access. So until we did this project and got access to these materials, I would never have found this personal connection. So, Jude.
Yes, and if I can add that it is as difficult as it is, even with the Ntlaka'pamux community and communities that Angie was just referencing, it becomes more difficult when you try to create the personal context that Teit had when he was working in the United States, because there's less information. He was working at speed. He was traveling from one place to another. He did provide, enough information to understand to give you an idea of the general context, but that interconnection among families, that multiple instances of sources of knowledge that is available from a close reading of the Ntlaka'pamux archives is not necessarily available for the Coeur d'Alene or for the other groups that he worked with in Washington State and Idaho.
I found my sample, or one of the samples. I'll quickly share my screen so I can pull this up. I don't know if everybody can see that, if it's accessible.
Oh, I remember this, yes.
Yeah, do you remember this, Andrea?
I do, yes.
So you spent some time going through this and then looking for names and spelling, and then connecting.
There's Antgo, for example, that's Teit's wife. Ishko, I'm not sure.
And
yeah.
in addition to this, also for the person who asked a specific question, if you when you dive in, you'll find there's a letter on March 12th, 1895. Dear sir and friend, I got back from my trip to Nicolet a couple of days ago. So going to Angie's home, and just take a look and you'll see all of the names that come pouring out in that one precious letter. And in the footnotes, you'll see the care that my dear colleagues have taken to find who those folks are. So from that little spot on, just take a look, and that might be a really exciting way in. But also, I'm so glad, Sarah, you've got the actual handwriting, because that's one of the things that I wish we had more of to show people here. So thanks for putting up the receipts as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment too on what Brian was talking about, the Indigenous people that really helped Tate. And then I know Tate took a photo of Hilda Austin when she was a baby. And Hilda seemed iconic because in the 70s, she started really helping out researchers like Stephen Aikstall, Nancy Turner, and others. And just this morning, we were working on some of Hilda's knowledge at our table. But Hilda was really integral to knowing about dancing and ethnobotany, picking berries, and how to preserve and prepare things. And her storytelling and all of this was really integral to a lot of the work that was done in the 1970s. So for Tate to take a photo of her when she's a baby, and then for her to go on and assist a lot of other people 60 years later was something that I really consider special. Juk.
Thank you, everyone, for those wonderful answers. We got a number of questions are coming in, and yeah, we will go, since we're going to have a lot of questions, we'll go till about a quarter after as well for people who are able to stick around. I wanted to note there's a couple people in the chat who send their greetings. One is Nina Reuther, who just has a note expressing gratitude about past and current work and info on how to stay in touch. Also, I want to note Benoit Thirault from the Canadian Museum of History. Benoit is a wonderful archivist at there, and he's a great person for anyone to get in touch with about the Tate materials that are there. Especially, I know there are, among other things, photographs and audio materials that all connect with this as well. So I encourage people to, especially from communities, to be in touch with Benoit and others there if they're not already. A lot of great questions. One I wanted to put forward is from Shandine Pete. Hello, Shandine. He asks, with information about tribes becoming more sought after by Indigenous and non-Indigenous researchers, how has your group navigated the issue of knowledge that is deemed sensitive or protected by individual nations? And like, to what degree does that come up in the in correspondence, if at all?
If I can begin to answer that, it didn't really come up too much in the correspondence because the correspondence was fairly general, didn't really touch on shamanic or other things that would be secluded. It has come up in when I worked at the Museum of, as it was then, the Museum of Civilization, now the Canadian Museum of History. We shared Tate's notes on songs with the community, and the response of one of the very knowledgeable people at the time was that some of this material could be shared, but some should be secluded. And so that it hasn't been broadly shared at all. It's still an archival document within the Canadian Museum of History. But within for the letters themselves, I don't think that we really ran into, we really came across information that might need to be secluded from the community's perspective.
I can add a little bit for how the project was approaching it. At least initially, I was part of a group of Indigenous scholars involved in the project, and we met quite regularly. And the intent was every volume that was produced for this Franz Boas Papers project would have to go through an Indigenous Advisory Council for those very reasons. And unfortunately, for different reasons, we never got to that point in the project. So with those concerns in mind, when we had many years of discussion with that group, the problem was it's such a large project with so many different ways to focus on Boas's work. And in terms of when the Indigenous Advisory Council met to when these things actually got ready to be reviewed, there was a huge gap in time. So unfortunately, that group wrapped up before we got to the point of producing our volume. But I looked at it through those eyes too. And I know John probably did the same, being from community, because we have our own obligations to our community. And there certainly are materials like that. I see them more in this other American Philosophical Society collection, the language material, the ACLS collection, which Brian, I think, has shared a link on. But I find more of that kind of culturally sensitive material in that. But you really have to know what you're looking for to see it sometimes, because Teit would just have jotted down a note on a piece of paper with a bunch of other things. And you look at it and you go, oh, what is that doing there? And certainly you don't want to see that out and about. And I know Brian and Sinair's approach has been always very respectful with these materials, and we've talked about it. You know, what should be shared and what shouldn't be shared. And I know Brian has those conversations, not just with me. I'm just one Ntlaka'amak person, you know, but also with our other communities that are reaching out to the APS. Thanks.
Yeah, and I can just follow up on that, yeah, APS has protocols for protecting and restricting sensitive or potentially sensitive materials, and we depend very much upon guidance from communities themselves. So there are some things that are sort of cautionarily restricted. Those are accessible to the communities where they're from, and certainly there are cases where we miss things that should be flagged. But so there are some materials that are digitized and accessible, can be requested by the communities themselves, but we're not really yet certain what their view will be on whether they should be more generally accessible. With Teit's materials, it's especially complicated because he worked from throughout British Columbia, as far north as the Yukon, throughout Washington, or just so many different communities, and his notes themselves are both voluminous and rather jumbled together as well. So it can sometimes be difficult to zero in, well, like, where is all of the information about such and such community or place? It can be scattered, so that is an ongoing challenge, but we have a permanent commitment to approaching it that way. Matt Bakavoy asks, how does the volume show the methodology in ethnography, how it developed from sort of Boas's period, particularly from the standpoint of standpoint-based epistemology, collaborative anthropologies, and centering Indigenous perspectives?
But I'll take a stab at answering that. The volume really stays within Teit's era. And within Teit's era, but certainly toward the end of the time that he was writing, when he was, you know, in the last years, you know, say of the First World War and so forth. Yes, ethnology and ethnographic methodology had moved on. Teit really did not. He stayed within the Boasian template that he began with in the 1890s. His geographic understanding, you know, expanded enormously. But the way he put volumes together, the way he put his accounts together, was fairly similar to what he began with in the 1890s. And Boas did not really interfere with that. There was an issue with I think Teit, in terms of the material that Teit worked on for the Coeur d'Alene and in Washington State, and he would have done much more. He would have gone back into the United States and expanded that work had he had his druthers. Boas was much more interested in the very specific questions that he had asked about language and comparative language. And that's what he ultimately had intended to publish. He did eventually publish Teit's ethnographic work, but he didn't, I don't think he really anticipated that Teit had planned to do as much ethnographic work as he contemplated. Now, to be fair to Teit, Boas didn't make that specific when they were writing letters back and forth and establishing the ethnographic work, as they said, across the line, below the 49th parallel. And so Teit was perfectly, it was perfectly legitimate for him to expect that the work in the United States would parallel the work in Canada. And it didn't quite. Boas had moved on. He had something else in mind. He was much more specifically focused on language. And while Teit did not stint on that work, he didn't scamp it at all. He gave it first priority. Really, his priority was the ethnographic work, and he always hoped to go back. But in terms of the structure and the composition of the ethnography, he did not particularly alter it at all in terms of what he had begun with the Thompson Indians of British Columbia. There are places where that template that Boas provided to Teit at the beginning, it was wearing thin. It was opening at the seams for Teit. And one of those areas is in the paper on tattooing and face and body painting, where there was a tremendous amount of symbolic material and some information about symbolic practice that the original template simply didn't provide for. And Teit managed to incorporate a lot of information in that one paper that is not as explicitly laid out in the rest of the body of his work. And for that reason, I have always found that paper very valuable. So I think that there were points at which Teit's sense of the ethnography was outgrowing what Boas had provided, but there wasn't a collaborative approach to that to address that. Anybody else? So ask Matt if that was the answer to his question.
I'm sure Matt will appreciate that answer and have many more thoughts on that as well. There's so many other great questions as well. Richard Hart asked, how important was Teit's approach to gender when he interviewed people? I would add on to that. He does seem like he was unusual in his era for being especially attentive to women's knowledge and expertise. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I'm not sure I completely heard.
The way Richard asked question, how important was Teit's approach to gender when he interviewed people?
Oh, to gender.
Gender, yes, within community, yeah.
You know, many male ethnographers of his day kind of shied away. Teit did not particularly. He worked with women. He wrote about women. He wrote about menstrual seclusion. He did. There is in the Field Museum collection a small collection of basketry items that were created by an Inuit woman to represent her experience, or perhaps a general experience of menstrual seclusion and first menses particularly. And it's a small collection. It's very interesting, and Teit saw it as worthy of collecting and documenting. It was part of the collection that he made for Homer Sargent, and it's in the Field Museum, and it's meticulously documented, and there's never, in Teit's writing, I have never encountered, either the published or unpublished material, any kind of shying away or lack of respect of the situation in which women found themselves.
I would say one of the reasons I think that he was especially attentive to women's voices was because of his first marriage with Antco.
Mm-hmm.
that was his way into community. That's how he first started to understand really quite deeply. That's how he learned language at the start, you know. And I think having Antco there as his sounding board really did play a lot into his early work.
But also one of his first publication, you know, was with Wachko, who was an older woman, and it was about rock art, and obviously he had rapport with her.
And in writing more intimately about his intimate relationships with his wives and women, I found it to be very egalitarian. You know, my wife is doing this, so I'm supporting her here. My kids need that, so I need to make sure, you know, that this is taken care of, and then I can attend to work. So I found that to be revolutionary, you know, reading other monographs and letters from the time. So I second what Angie and Andrea said here. I'll see, John, we have we found the marriage certificate. I'll see if I can I can share a screen here.
Sure, and then we'll have one final question for everyone.
Mhm.
Well, while Sarah's working on that, I'll pose the one other question, and this is great. Oh, sure. Sarah, could you tell us what we're looking at?
That's Tate's marriage.
This is the name little Aaron has, Kulamjit.
This is from the Vital Statistics collection at the BC Archives, and they have documents like this available online. But you can see, if you could scroll a little bit, Sarah, scroll up to see Tate's name there.
His parents. In Antco.
My coworker's son has the name Kulamjut, which is represented here in William Kulamjut.
Thank you for that. That's a good picture of all the many other archives and places where there's highly related things. And this team of people you see here today is really a dream team of expertise on many threads where Tate and people he knew and loved, where more information can be found. On the was a really great final question I'd like to pass along from Gretchen Fox. She asks, first she sends her congratulations to everyone and says, can the team talk about how Ntlakatmuk and their Indigenous neighbors in the BC interior might engage with this volume and their ongoing work today, such as on Indigenous laws, stewardship, land claims, etc.
Yeah, I can start, and then maybe Andy, you wanna? The land claims are my thing. Gretchen, thanks for the question. So at Union of BC Indian Chiefs, that's really what we do. And my interest in these records really did come about because of that. We do use them, and Christina, I don't know if others can see the questions, but my colleague Christina Hannes makes a comment that she used it for her own research on a project recently. I certainly have used it for everything. Every land claim that I do, I looked at Tate, and I do get a word of caution from my community, though, is that's one type of record, right? And I have to look at our community knowledge, our current knowledge keepers, our elders, and our knowledgeable community experts on different topics. And I can't just take Tate at face value. So looking at his published materials, digging deeper into the unpublished materials, going back to community, and it's a back and forth. It's not just a one loop and you're done. As the more I understand and the more I learn, the more I go back to Tate and I go back to my community and ask, did Tate get it right? And we've used it for Indigenous laws. There's a lot of materials. My nation and John's nation, Neintlakamach, we're all working on laws right now. And we're all using kind of this kind of material in different ways. But it's there if you know how to look. And it's one of the few places that we have to go to for this material outside of community. And unfortunately, even today, we work in a society where it's given more stock if somebody from outside of the community wrote it. An ethnologist, an anthropologist, an archaeologist, a linguist. If their records match our records, or if their records are there and available, we still have to collect those too. Right? So having this as an additional source of material for that is amazing. The letters themselves don't always get you there, so you do have to use it as a springboard, like everybody's been saying, into this other material. So if I was using this for land claims research or any other community project, I go to the letter to get the context, and then I go deeper into the records and all of these other places around the world. Thanks.
Yeah, I was writing to Gretchen actually offline to respond to her question because I support everything that Angie said, and as a non-Indigenous person, as a researcher, for me, the most important records that I work with are the oral ones, and the documentation of them, though, I've learned in part from the good example of Teit. All of his I am not sure's actually are the kind of careful qualifications that are so important. The man seemed to be extremely honest in the way he would let us know what he thought and what he knew and how he knew it. So what he was able to do was to, as faithfully as he could, document what he was hearing and seeing. So one way into engagement there is by noticing that way of working. The other way in is simply by the fact that this is a group of people that is engaged in that kind of work. So there are just a few of us on the screen now, but in the community that's here today, there's a number of scholars who work in Indigenous law in British Columbia and are interested in these letters from that perspective. So through that engagement, there's also a way into the talks and the stories and the information that can get you further. So Gretchen Fox, I don't know you personally, but I'll tell you how all of us can engage, how all of us can support that kind of work. That's very important, and I'm betting that you're involved in that in some way. So we'll look forward to hearing more from you about the ways that you will see as well.
Thank you very much for those extremely helpful and thoughtful answers. For everyone whose questions and comments that did not have a chance to read in the Q&A, we will share that with the panel here, and people will get in touch where they can. And we had one reading from one of James Teit's great-granddaughters. So thank you very much for tuning in as well. We're very glad to have you here. And to everyone else who was able to join us today. I want to personally thank everyone who's done so much extraordinary work on this book. I haven't seen it yet either, but I'm really looking forward to cracking it open and carrying it around. We hope that everyone who's joined us today is well, and you and your families are well, and we look forward to a chance to see you again here or in Philadelphia or wherever. And thank you again, everybody. I'm sure
Brian,
round of applause.
Brian,
Yes,
can I
please.
just add one thing?
Of course.
Regna has not been able to join us, Regna Darnell.
Yes.
She is has inaugurated and really made possible the Boas Papers project. And it is a shame that she hasn't been able to join us today. There's some kind of glitch. But I do want to acknowledge that the enormous help that Regna has given us all through this project. Her knowledge was, her broad knowledge was of great help to us. And she was constantly helpful at any time, at any point that we turned to her. And so I just want to acknowledge that all of the things that we have talked about today, Regna has contributed to, and we are very grateful.
Absolutely. I second that along with many others. And thank you to Regna for that. And thank you all again for joining us. And we look forward
Brian?
to staying. Yes, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Could you just mention that so people aren't surprised, the hard
Yes.
copy version comes in 2 parts. So you're going to get 2 books for the price of one with the hard copy version. And also Nebraska Press has a PDF version, which you have to read through their app. But when you get that one, it's 1 volume. So there'll be 3 different covers for this. Thanks.
6AS2.
Don't forget
Yeah.
the promo code at 40%, 6AS24 at nebraskapress.unl.edu.
Yes, there is that, and I'm told there's the additional discount available for communities. I don't have that information at hand, but we can share that with people as well. Yes, get the volume. It's great. Many great
Brian, I would
people.
like to say thank you to you and to Paul for all of the enormous help that you gave us while we were putting this together.
I would also like to thank, I'm grateful for that. I would also thank my colleague and mentor, Tim Powell, who's no longer with us, who also gave great energy and support on many levels to so many aspects of this work. So as one of his strong presence here at the APS and known to many people as well. So this is really a wonderful project that has brought together many wonderful people, and we hope that this can be beneficial to many people for a long, long time. And I hope we can continue to have more conversations like this, and hope to see you all again very soon. Take care and be well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. We
Thank
appreciate
you. Thank you, everyone. APS Senior, UNP.
Thanks for coming,
Regna,
everyone.
when you see this?
There's still lots of stuff on Teit being found in the Detroit Lakes area and other places.
And hi to all your companions, John,
Okay,
hiding
Polly.
behind the table.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.